The members of the EEAC network signed out two levers and important elements of the digital transformation, both central to the European Green Deal and the European Digital Strategy, to be explored during this conference that, as you know, will take place during the next 3 days from Barcelona, but in this virtual mode because of COVID. Firstly, as I mentioned before, we signed out two issues, two main levers. Firstly, the relationship between the green and digital transformation, also known as the Twin Challenge. And secondly, the ethical and social implications of this twin transformation, including the use of artificial intelligence systems in the European area. I'm not an expert on these very important topics. This is why we have invited very important speakers that will inspire and will share their visions during these 3 days from different countries and different perspectives. But now, this means that I'm not going to talk about digitalization. They are the ones that will share their visions with us. But now I would like to introduce you a very important person for us, is Ramon Roch i Enric, the chairman of CATS, the Advisory Council for Sustainable Development of Catalonia. Ramon, welcome to São Paulo, welcome to the annual conference. Thank you for being here. We know that you have a very busy agenda those days, so thank you. And now the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, dear ladies and gentlemen, it's really pleased to welcome you to the conference on behalf of CATS, the Advisory Council for Sustainable Development of Catalonia. It is a great honor for our Council to host the 29th Annual Conference of the European Network of Advisory Councils of the Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development, of which CATS has been member since 2004. I would like to sincerely thank for all fellow EEAC for trusting us to organize the annual conference we begin today. I have to admit that we find it is very strange to continue with this virtual mode that we have used so much during the pandemic. However, the evolution of the pandemic and the desire of reaching whoever audience justify this virtual format. I hope next year we can see you presentially. The world was changing a lot in some respects compared to the October 2016 when we met here in Barcelona in the occasion of the EEAC Network 24 Annual Conference. What we will analyze in the coming days is in no way detached from what we talked about 5 years ago in Barcelona. On the contrary, these days we will discuss how digital transformation can help us accelerate the transition of sustainability. As you know, the world faces crucial challenges for its future. We require urgent solutions, and digital transformation is without doubt part of the solution. Digital transformation is already part of our day-by-day. Future is getting closer. In end my speech, with a very sincere thanks you to all the speakers, especially the Asun Lera St.Clair and Miranda Sherras, both members of CATS, and also the EEAC Network for all the support it has offered us in the organization of the conference that we begin today. Finally, I am very grateful for the efforts of the CATS technical team to make it possible. Let me close the speech with wishing you successful conference. Thank you all, and thank you for coming, for stay here. And now, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ramon. Thank you, the chairman of CATS. You know, both the relation between the green and digital transformation, as well as the ethical and social implications of the digital transformation, are highly complex issues, and therefore, I'm so pleased that we will be guided through the next 3 days of our conference by Miranda Sherras. Miranda Sherras is the vice chairman, the vice president of the EEAC, and also member of CATS. Miranda has a distinctive career as a social scientist, and since 2016, she is the chair of the Environment and Climate Policy at the Bavarian School of Public Policy at the Technical University of Munich, Germany. Miranda has been appointed as member to several advisory councils and committees. Currently, as I inform you, she's member of CATS, the Advisory Council for Sustainable Development of Catalonia, and she is also the vice president of the vice chair of the EEAC Network. Miranda, thank you for traveling from Munich in order to be here. I think that you will accompany, you will guide us through this very inspiring journey on this very important topic, which is the twin challenge, how we deal with this twin challenge, digital transformation, green transformation in Europe, with these ethical and social inclusion aspects, which are very important if we don't want to leave no one behind. So, Miranda, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Arnau. Thank you also, Ramon, for those introductory words. And welcome to everybody. For the next 3 days, we are going to have a very exciting set of presentations and chances for questions and answers related to two of the biggest transformations facing the planet, facing Europe right now. One is, of course, the sustainability challenge, the challenge dealing with poverty, with income distribution questions, with climate change, with biodiversity loss, with questions about how we do affordable housing, how do we do the transitions that bring the people along and leave no one behind. We just came out of the climate change negotiations, and in the spring we'll be going into the biodiversity negotiations internationally. And here in Europe, we are thinking about how can we use technological transformations, the digital transformation that will take us into the era of artificial intelligence, robotization, the ability to transfer information and assess information in the shortest moments of time, how we will use that to make steps for the changes that we need to achieve in such a short time, to deal with rising greenhouse gas emissions, to deal with pollution, to deal with social inequalities. So we really have a lot ahead of us in these next 3 days. We're very happy that you are all with us, and the insights that will be coming from the different councils that are part of the European Environment and Sustainable Development Advisory Network. This will help us to think through the different perspectives that we see in Europe on these issues, and to think about the ways that we can move ahead together to address these challenges at the European level. As Arnau said, my name is Miranda Schreurs. I am Professor of Environment and Climate Policy, and we have been looking at these twin challenges as well where I work, and so I'm very happy to be here with you today. In terms of our plan of action, we'll have a number of speakers, and throughout, if you have questions that you would like to address to the speakers, please let us know and we'll be happy to share them. Our first speaker of the day, I'm very happy to welcome Ms. Anna Barnadas-López, who has an exciting job as Secretary for Climate Action here in the Catalonian Ministry for Climate Action, Food, and the Rural Agenda. So Ms. Barnadas-López, I'm happy to turn the floor over to you now.
Thank you so much, Miranda. I'm very proud to be here today. And ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Teresa Jordà Roura, Minister of Climate Action, Food and Rural Agenda of the Government of Catalonia, and on my own, I would like to welcome you to this conference. I do so, first of all, by thanking the kind invitation of the President of the CATS and the EEAC Network to be able to be with all you on such an important day for the network and the 18 councils that are part of it. As the president and director of CATS are well aware, the government of Catalonia highly values the work done by this advisor board, which, despite the non-mandatory and non-binding nature of its recommendations, has managed to make its voice heard in both Catalonian, Mediterranean, and European Union. Soft and diplomatic, but firm voice to which we listen and to whom we are grateful for their recommendations and, when necessary, alerts. The COP26 in Glasgow closed a few days ago. Despite some progress that needs to be taken into account, the agreements reached by the international community leave many challenges open, and with widespread feeling that we have not known or been unable to give the appropriate response to the climate emergency situation. From Mediterranean area, the increase in average temperature is advancing at higher rate than on a global scale. We see it with a great concern. At times like this, when it seems that global agreements are so weak or at least insufficient, it is imperative to continue working resolutely to improve the conditions of our planet and the people who live on it. Despite that we have seen in Glasgow, and precisely from what we have seen, we must continue to work, and we must do so from all levels. Let me state that the government of Catalonia has been working for many years with a strong commitment to sustainable development and ecological transition policies. The challenge, as everywhere, is the accelerated drive for transformative and transversal policies. In this sense, the unification in a single department of climate, energy, biodiversity, water, waste, food, and rural development policies marks a really important step for us. Beyond this conceptual change in policies and the organizations that promote and manage them, we need to have practical tools shared with society as a whole, companies, universities, and research centers to drive the ecological transition. This is where the importance of digital transformation lies. Without it, we will not be able to drive many of the actions we need. Let me give just one example. Last week, our government announced in Glasgow that the promotion of teleworking could lead to a 24% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in Catalonia. Without digitalization, this would be impossible. It's just an example. We will find hundreds of thousands of them in the field of mobility, monitoring the impacts of climate change, education, and industry and trade. In any case, we need to devote more efforts to driving the digital transformation in order to accelerate the ecological transition. And it must be done, as you will analyze in this conference, without leaving anyone behind and guaranteeing equal access to technology. In addition, this must be done by placing ethics and respect for human rights at the heart of this digital transformation. Without this, the digital transformation will not be complete from the point of view of sustainable development. For all of this, given the importance of this issue, I think this conference is especially important and really timely. Therefore, I wish you a successful conference. Thank you so much, Miranda. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anna Barnadas-López. And it's really a pleasure to know that Catalonia is quite a leader within the European Union in terms of the activities it's promoting for climate change. I think this is an area where we will see Catalonia continuing to push push the targets forward and help all of us to see how we can actually implement digital solutions to help us with sustainability. I'm now happy to turn the floor over to a very welcome guest, the President of the Government of Catalonia, Pere Aragonès Garcia. He will be joining us today from the residence of the presidency and will speak to us on some of the initiatives that we see here in Catalonia related to these big twin challenges.
Chair and members of the EEAC Network, Chair of CATS, Secretary for Climate Action, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to warmly welcome you to your 29th annual conference. I would have loved to welcome you in person in Catalonia. Unfortunately, the health situation prevents you from being in Barcelona. However, I am sure that once the pandemic is over, we will have the opportunity to meet anywhere in Catalonia to talk in depth about the great sustainability challenges that Europe and the planet as a whole must face. Last week, I had the opportunity to take part in COP26. I traveled to Glasgow, well aware of the gravity of the moment we are living and the crucial importance of the actions we take from governments and the decisions we do not make. I know that I do not need to explain you the significance of climate change and its impacts. And I am referring especially to the advisory boards that are part of the EEAC Network, have worked on this topic for decades, and you have warned us about the situation. You have advised us, governments and parliaments, of how to deal with it for a long time. However, the situation really worries my government and me. This is why I want to share with all of you my strong conviction that climate change requires disruptive actions, very profound transformations of our production and consumption model. In fact, we are facing a moment in history that requires systemic transformations everywhere and as a matter of urgency. Moreover, this systemic transition to a more sustainable world must be accompanied by digital transformation. It is their great ally. To put it in another way, using the terminology used by European Commission, ecological transition and digital transformation are, in fact, a twin challenge, a challenge with two inseparable parts. This is how the government of Catalonia has understood it. Our strategy for the current term, approved just a few months ago, aims to boost four transformations in order to achieve a just, prosperous, green, feminist and fully free Catalonia. Obviously, digital transformation and green transition are crucial in order to achieve the envisaged future for our country. This is why I want to take part of the welcome session of this conference, because we are fully convinced of the importance of this systemic shift towards sustainability, because we are part of this systemic shift and because we are facing this twin challenge with a strong collaboration of different ministries. However, allow me to make a final request. In your capacity of advisory councils on the environment and sustainable development, and in my capacity of president of a government with an advisory council, I would like to receive from you some conclusions and recommendations on how to face this twin challenge. With this final request, I wish all of you a very successful and stimulating conference.
What an honor to be welcomed from the President of the Government of Catalonia, Mr. Aragonès Garcia. Thank you so much, Mr. President. And today we, as I mentioned before, will have several speeches, and our first speech will be, academic speech will be from Marcel Dorsch, who is the advisor to the German Environment Advisory Council's president. His name is Marcel Dorsch. The president of the German Environment Advisory Council is Dirk Messner. And today we'll be hearing about the digital transformation from the perspective of Germany, which has been pushing very hard for finding ways that we can use new technological capacities for dealing with a number of challenges we're facing in the world today. So I turn the floor over now to Marcel Dorsch. Welcome, Marcel.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to be here. Representing UBA, and also as a former colleague in the EEAC context, as I worked for the WBGU, the German Advisory Council on Global Change, a couple of months ago. So shall we start with the presentation? Here it is.
Yes, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Great, thanks you. Thank you. Yeah. Great that we can speak today. Great that I can give an input today. Next slide, please. Just to clarify, normally Dirk Messner would have been here. Unfortunately, he's got sick yesterday evening. So I jumped in just yesterday evening, and I just want to clarify and justify why it might be nevertheless helpful for you to stay here and listen to me. We have kind of a history together, Dirk and I. We worked together at WBGU for a couple of years, he as the co-chair of the council, I as a scientist, and we co-developed a series of reports, scientifically based reports, as scientific policy advice for the German government on the matter of interconnecting the sustainability transformation and digital change. And Dirk moved like 2 years ago to UBA, to the German Environmental Agency, as president, and now a couple of months ago I just joined him there in his office, working again on digital change and sustainability transformations. So this just for clarification. Next. This is just an overview of what we produced together. So a big flagship report, 500 pages. I will talk about in a minute a little bit and give some insights how we dealt with the topic of interconnecting, interlinking these two big transformational shifts. And we also produced some other policy reports on that issue, including a charter for digital cooperation. Next. This is again a very small product, very analog, non-digital product, and I would just highly recommend you to look at WBGU's website to order or download these products. This is, for example, on the SDGs and 2030 agenda and digital change. Next. So a very important starting point for us in our discussions and our daily work is the observation that back in 2015, when the world societies and governments agreed on the 2030 agenda, which is headlined Transforming Our World, so a very big and powerful approach, that back then in 2015, so not that long ago, digitalization, digital change was not that of a topic. So there are some references to technical issues, technology, etc., but there's not really some kind of reference on digitalization as such. And this is very, very striking when you think back. It's just 4 years ago, 6 years ago, and this link was really not made there in this really important document. And this was really striking for us. And we tried to offer some perspective, some heuristics, some insights on why it is very important to interlink these important global transitions and transformational processes together. Next. So we were also always a little bit skeptical, talk about a digital revolution. So how big is the change? But nevertheless, I think it's a very good and useful heuristic to briefly, as a starting point, think about this analogy with regard to, for example, the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is, of course, a very big shift in human history, which brought great prosperity to mankind, but of course also social misery over decades. maybe even over centuries. Even our climate change problem today is, of course, a consequence of the Industrial Revolution with regarding the emissions growth and the resulting prosperity globally. It had also an impact on the Enlightenment. We had already some kind of a knowledge explosion, growing interconnectedness, globalization, and this is very important and a very positive driving force in human history. But of course, there is also the dialectics of Enlightenment. So, for example, think about the industrialized mass model here in Germany during the Third Reich. If we talk about digital revolution, we can debate whether this is useful, whether this is the right terminology, but the important point here is that we really need to anticipate these shifts and developments early on. So there are, of course, great prospects for new prosperity, maybe even for new enlightenment, if you think about the growing interconnectedness, public knowledge, databases, etc. Maybe even for a new enlivenment, so a new interconnectedness, new relationship between humans and nature. But the important thing is that we have to anticipate also the negative aspects, of course. So we have to really deal and prepare early on. We need to be in the new Karl Marx, so to say, for the digital age, and to anticipate the bursts, for example, of environmental and social cohesion. Next. Yeah, this is a bit of a difficult slide, but this really goes along the same line. We have to ask, to anticipate what we should do now. What for? What for digital revolution? What for digital technologies? So what is the purpose? The purpose question is really important here. And these are just 3 sketches on how to look at these developments and how they might be used on different spots of the world and by different people and groups. So we have this perspective of a radical radicalism. So digitalization really as a radical disruption. This is the narrative of the Silicon Valley, this libertarian account, but also the totalitarian account. Look at China, for example, with the surveillance technologies that are in place there. So this is really about radical disruption, destroying the system, including its functions. This is a very dystopian perspective, of course. The business as usual, as we saw it at WBGU back then, is really this incremental radicalism. So in a way, digitalization, digital technologies nowadays often are somehow driving a creeping acceleration of given mostly unsustainable trends. So we really have to take care and redirect the purpose of using digital technologies worldwide so that we leave the road of unintended side effects towards ruining our system. The goal here in this logic would then be some kind of a radical incrementalism. So really using digitalization as a useful means for sustainability transformations. And I will just give you a couple of heuristics and perspectives we developed in our report back then, to then also add some newer recommendations from our current work and perspectives to really build this strong link between these 2 trends and to interlink also different perspectives and communities towards this goal. Next. I will be brief on this. This is just an overview of what we did in this very big piece, these 500 pages. And I will just showcase some of the things we did. Next. So the biggest chapter back then was really a big series of the subchapters where we really tried to stick to the scientific literature and think about, okay, where are the connections? Where does digital technology, digital change really matter with regard to important sustainability areas, different thematic fields? Of course, it's about the energy system, about decarbonizing and decentralizing energy production. It's about waste. It's about how we are able to manage circularity. So the vision of a circular economy is here really important, but also about new mobility systems, new mobility patterns, green IT, ICT technology, or ecosystem monitoring. But we also had perspectives on broader sustainability questions, for example, agenda bias. That is really deep down in algorithmic biases, for example. We talked about digital commons, about knowledge production, and also about great visions, for example, about global environmental awareness that can be built better in a very interconnected, also virtually enhanced global society. Next. What I like very much was a very small chapter where we dealt with non-scientific literature as well, because I think it's really important in this discourse to keep somehow settled, to keep it on the ground, to look very far in the future, to be prepared to anticipate the bursts and the different developments early on, but not to follow the hype too much. So there are many different dystopian and utopian narratives out there, and it was really important and interesting for us to look at them and question them as well. Next. The second biggest chapter, I think, was really, just a service chapter, more or less. And we tried to, showcase different key technologies in the digital age that are important, that have been already important for a couple of centuries. Never forget that. So it's not really starting. But we also tried to think about different impacts on spheres of life. And maybe you go on the next slide. We also try to synthesize different key characteristics. So what is the important change in the digital age? Like interconnectedness here in green, cognition. Technical systems are able to help us with cognitive tasks. Autonomous system and its impact on our daily lives. The virtuality I already talked about a little bit, and of course, taking all these developments together, the knowledge explosion, so the growth of knowledge and how we can deal with this, the availability of knowledge and the sharing of knowledge, of course. Next. This is hardly visible, I see here, but we also try to really address the different actors. This is really important to address agency and to take up agency, to create agency. Addressing different actors, their specific challenges regarding digital change in a sustainability context, and pinpointing the transformative potentials for each of them, from individuals to companies, cities, communities, states, and of course also the international community. Next. So this is a key part here. We also tried to give some guidance to develop heuristics on how to understand the interlinkage of these different spheres, these two spheres. And this is our spaghetti monster. This is our key heuristic in the report, 3 dynamics of the digital age. And this is really like a synthesis of the interrelation between digital change and transformations to sustainability. And it is made to derive different but acute needs for action. So each of these developments already have started, sometimes long ago, and we have to deal with all of them, even though they have different characteristics, different styles, different answers, different actions that are needed. Next. Let me briefly talk about the first dynamic, which is the most obvious for a lot of environmental researchers and politicians. It's really about taking digitalization for sustainability. We can sketch an utopian, more positive perspective where we really create a digitally supported sustainability agenda where we can comply with planetary guardrails, use digital technology for our sustainability goals, and also, of course, make digitalization itself sustainable, with regard to energy consumption, resource use, etc. Raw earth materials, very important sustainability, environmental, mostly issues that are important and that can be dealt with today. And it's also important to make it a means to implement our sustainability goals. So to take digital change, digital technologies, to drive innovations towards our sustainability agenda, that is there on the table. So some kind of an agenda 2030 plus. Next slide. The second dynamic is another perspective. It's more about sustainable digitalized societies. So one key argument of ours was that we at least want to offer a vision for societies to go for. Our argument was that we need a debate about where do we want to go for. This is again this very important purpose question. So digital change for what? And we proposed some kind of a new humanism here and imagined like a network world society as a further advancement of enlightenment and humanism. a development of global environmental awareness, and a culture of cooperation, empathy, and solidarity. So this is just our offer to go for, to strive for an ambitious vision for digital change. And of course, the flip side, the dystopian perspective, would be that we end in many parts in a digitally empowered totalitarianism. This is a very acute danger, I would say. We see developments in China already, for example, so that we have hollowed out democracies, for example, digitally empowered autocracies, massive inequalities regarding all the changes, for example, in the supply chain, in production circles, etc., and the domination by elites, total surveillance, etc. Next. The third dynamic, you can make jokes about it, but we had very good and enlightened discussions about it. This seems futuristic, but I think in a sustainability context, it's very important and adequate. And you, as I understood it, will deal with it as well in this conference, thinking a little bit broader about the future of Homo sapiens. So there are a lot of ethical questions on the table. And we argue that we really need a society-wide discourse on desirable futures. We need research, education, and ethics around how we would evolve as Homo sapiens if we want to strengthen our self-confidence as a natural being, and how we want to purposely design the human-machine collaborations. There is a lot of research going on with brain interfaces, human enhancement, visions about superintelligence, etc., and even the possibilities of an artificial human evolution. So this is just a sketch, but it's really important to think about that and early on debate this in our societies. Next. So yeah, this is again just these three dynamics of the digital age. I hope they're helpful. Next. And now you move too quickly. One back, please. Yeah, just briefly, we of course derived some highlight recommendations as well, so that we really need this society-wide update to see sustainability in digital competencies as a modernization program, to create digital services for the public and to create public welfare here. So not to go into power imbalances with the big tech sector, but to create public service ICT and public digital commons, for example. We need digital literacy and cooperation. This is important in education, different discourse arenas, etc. And of course, a big leverage here is connect digital change with the circular economy issue. So recoupling of economic and natural processes. The EU here is of course a pioneer, or should be a pioneer even more. And it has the big chance and a possibility to really give digital innovation a purpose within its borders. Next. Yeah, our work back then inspired a lot of different political processes, or informed them at least. The Environmental Ministry created an own digital agenda, even though also the Ministry for Education and Research. Some of you might know that we had this council decision in the European Union during the German presidency. And I will also briefly talk about some international perspectives we're dealing with later on. Next. So where are we today? I started with the 2030 agenda, and I would argue there are still many, many missing links. We had this digital change forgotten more or less in the 2030 agenda back in 2015. But when you look, for example, there's just some random examples. The Artificial Intelligence Index Report 2021. They highlight top 9 takeaways. There's no connection at all to sustainability or the environmental issues, not at all. Nothing on social justice, etc. And then important for us now at the German Environmental Agency, the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation in 2020 initially was presented with different important key areas for action, and the sustainability dimension was again missing. So another very important high-level UN process where this perspective was missing again. And Dirk Messner and Uba and other colleagues jumped in, and I will talk about CODES in a minute. One brief comment about the twin transition, which is also like a key reference for you, Ursula von der Leyen, and the European Commission's perspective. The twin transition is, of course, fine. I very much like to highlight both of these transitions politically, but why twin? So it's both too similar and yet too separate, I would argue. Twins do not have to interact, so integration is needed, real connection, a discourse between both of them. Next. So there are a lot of missing links to build. We need to shift innovation, visions and patterns towards sustainability. We have to mobilize markets to drive digitalization towards sustainability. We have to shift markets, for example, create roadmaps to reduce emissions and resource consumption with digital tools, talked about circular economy, etc. We have to modernize the state, because only what we understand as a public sector, we can also govern and organize. We have to build strong research networks still between digital and sustainability scientific communities, and we have to create different dialogue structures between different societal actors. Next. So these are just some high-level examples, what I am dealing now at environmental agencies. So we, for example, build an AI lab for sustainable applications. This is very interesting to build this in the public sector for institutional literacy, to really deal with the topic, to see how we can use these different tools properly, that they make sense in the end for our applications. We have cooperation between UBA and the Industry Association on Sustainable Industry 4.0, for example. We are setting a different strategic thematic foci on sustainable digitalization and the different fora we are engaged. For example, the European Protection Agency network, or another forum with China. We stimulate academic debates. We have call for papers going out on these topics. And my last slide is dedicated to CODES, because I just want to set this on the table here and to promote it. Next slide. We created, together with other colleagues and institutions, the Coalition for Digital Environmental Sustainability, together with the UNEP, with UNDP, with the Republic of Kenya, Environmental Ministry, Future Earth, International Science Council. So very important actors from different spheres that want to deal and interlink these two strands. It's a global multi-stakeholder alliance with a good purpose and mission, I think. And we are now officially part of the implementation process for the UN Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation I just mentioned. And you are free to join the community, to receive information, and to also be involved. We have different stakeholder consultation rounds. And next year at UNEA, at the UN Environmental Assembly, we will present our first action plan to the world with further key recommendations on this topic. Next slide. Thanks a lot for your patience, and please get in touch.
Thank you so much for this really terrific talk. It is a nice lead into the discussions we'll be having in the next several days. And I wanted to see if we could get you to tell us just a little bit more about this intersection between the need for bringing in two different sectors, integrating these two different sectors, the environmental sustainability dimension and the digitalization dimension. It's kind of fascinating that we have organizations like the United Nations thinking about big questions, but not always seeing the interconnectivity early enough in the process. So really exciting also this CODES, the Coalition for Digital Environmental Sustainability that you mentioned. Could you tell us what are the things that we really need to do to bring this together, and how does CODES help?
Yeah, I think as I just mentioned, I mean, there are many roads to go, roads to take, and this is also important for this conference to really urge the different participants and actors involved to think about how they can start these processes, because there are many opportunities. We now, as you might know, are in, for example, Germany in the coalition talks for a new government. And even there, it's not automatically guaranteed that when you go, for example, to the politicians that talk about digitalization, that they at all talk about sustainability there. So we pushed for that, at least we try to promote this, and as far as I know, it's now at least a topic there. We don't know the coalition treaty yet, but this is really important to really think about the different leverages and the different links you can build. I showcased some of them. Of course, from my background, the research community is very important, but I'm also very optimistic when I look back, when I give this talk again, which more or less refers to a report we created together in 2019 and started in late 2017, inclusive process also with different stakeholders. The discourse is very different now. So a lot of things happen. There are initiatives, climate change AI, for example. There are different programs created by, for example, some of our council members back then in their research departments, for example. But this has to flourish, this has to bloom everywhere. So the important message is, of course, digital is not a sector. It's not about infrastructure only, about having a good connection. It's, of course, about inclusion, especially globally, and having access. So the digital divide is very important, but it is, you know, yeah, even when you take this inclusion perspective, it's a very broad matter. It affects everything. So, yeah. Sustainability challenges and the digital change are, of course, highly relevant for the 21st century, and they have to be dealt with interlinked from the beginning on, as early as possible to really succeed.
Marcel, I think your comments here help us also to think about this question of how we maintain democracy and vision for the future, where we want to go, what we want to protect, what's important to us. And I really like the comments that you made to say we're the ones who have to choose how we shape this technological development and to think about how it's used and that it can be used for purposes like sustainability. Could I ask you just to make one last comment here? What would be one or two areas where you say we could already see where digitalization is having a big impact?
A positive impact, you mean, or?
Yeah, positive impact for sustainability. Mm-hmm.
Mm. Yeah, of course. I mean, I don't know if they are the most exciting areas, but of course, I mean, I briefly mentioned the energy sector, urbanization. This is, of course, very relevant when you really look at the specific challenges we now face. So there we have options and possibilities, and it's already, of course, used. This is very basic, but for example, as I highlighted as well, thinking about the industrial sector, the industrial transformation, many companies are starting to deal with 4.0 technologies, so with digital technologies, to enhance their production circles, for example, but they most often don't do it under the headline of sustainability. And so therefore, we really try to create these transformative coalitions at UBA now to, again, start early and interact with these actors and showcase that it's really not only a means to enhance productivity or something like that, or reduce costs, but that we can really use these technologies also for the purpose of a sustainable world. And now that the political agenda is more or less set, we have now decarbonization goals, at least Germany and Europe. This road is there to go. And so even companies, a lot of companies are front runners in this regard. And I think this is really important and should be supported also by governments.
Great, thanks so very much, Marcel. Thanks also for jumping in last minute to help us out. You did such a terrific job. You would never know you were jumping in last minute. So thanks very, very much. And I'm now happy to welcome Asun Lera St.Clair, who is joining us from Oslo. She has expertise on the application of human, ethical, and sustainable development research, and has also been advisor for the Earth Systems Services Unit of the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. And I think from Ms. St.Clair, we'll be hearing some things about the ethical questions related to the digital transformation. So, Ms. St.Clair, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present some of the work. I would like to say that I'm going to be speaking with two hats, the work that we do in the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, Honor of Sciences, but also some of the work we do in the corporate research unit that I work for in Oslo, the company DNB, about the digital transformation and AI and ethical and social issues related to this. So if you can put my presentation up, I will be excellent. So we can move to the next slide and actually the second one. So I have been asked for a very challenging question. What are the main challenges to achieve a social and inclusive digital transformation? And this is a super broad theme. So what I have done is to think how could I sort of cut it through in a way that offers concrete examples to all of you. So if we move to the next slide, I have a brief outline of my talk. I'm going to start a little bit to where our colleague ended, leveraging digital technologies for sustainable development and talking about the work that we did on this. And then I'm going to move to say something around the already very digital nature of climate and sustainability science, because I think it's important we don't forget about that. We'll use some of the work we have done in DNB on the interaction between technology and society. We'll speak around AI ethics. And then I'm going to give some examples on the actually hard work that it takes to truly integrate socio-ecological aspects and technical systems. And then I would like to conclude with some perhaps philosophical reflections around the role of human beings and that new Homo sapiens that our colleague was also referring to. So if we move to the next slide and the next. So there is quite a lot of movement around this idea that we just heard of bridging the worlds of sustainability science and the worlds of the digital transformation. And this is very important. And I think that uniting those communities is really hard work. And I believe that all the points that my colleague had put in the list of the missing links are perhaps fundamentally as a starting point for my talk. So we really do need to make that effort. But on the other hand, I think that part of that effort is to really understand that we need to put the social and the human factors at the center. So it's a lot more than simply uniting these two communities. We need to see those human and social factors at a very deep technical level, as well as a sort of broad level. It's not only the ambition for deploying AI for good, but it's also about the actual hard work of how do we do this at the technical level, as well as at the outcome level. If we move to the next slide, I want to show you one of the pieces of the work that we did in Future Earth, and that is now partnering with the Codes Network that we also heard, is the Sustainability in the Digital Age report. This was launched a couple of years ago. And what we identified there is a series of digital disruptors. And the idea is that digital technologies enable us to do absolutely marvelous things. And it's understanding how those marvelous things could be leveraged towards that climate safe and equitable future. That, for example, unprecedented transparency that digital technologies give you can lead, and they already do in many cases, to fantastic ways to understand the footprint of, let's say, the life cycle of a product, and to bring this information to consumers in a label so they are absolutely informed. You can also think about the use of blockchain to encode the information from all the long supply chain of a particular product to ensure also that this is not only transparent, but it's also not being tampered with. The same with intelligent systems, the possibilities of mass collaboration that allow for building coalitions rapidly around an issue, and even the use of mixed reality. And I will actually give an example of that in order to convey and communicate the possibilities of the deployment of technologies in society. But along all these, we need to work together to make sure that these digital disruptors are not only seen on their technical aspects, but they are also seen as being driven and in interaction with human beings and as being the reflection of human values. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is actually the democratization of this digital transformation. So it not only is possible for those who are highly advanced and who have the resources and the technology and the capabilities, but that is available to all. So that is a huge challenge. But let me move now, if we can go to the next slide, to talk about the already digital nature of climate and sustainability science. If we move to the next slide, I have 3 examples of some of the obvious work that Earth Sciences departments do. You see the Mare Nostrum computer as my background, and the work that we do in the Barcelona Supercomputing Center Earth Sciences department simply shows that in order to understand climate and climate scenarios, we will have never been able to do that without actually the use of supercomputers. So the digital technologies have always been at the core, and the more we have capabilities and enhanced capabilities for calculation, for computation, and more recently now also including artificial intelligence, we are more able to understand the Earth. And in fact, at the European Commission level, we have the ambition of creating a digital twin of the Earth. So all these capabilities are fabulous and fantastic, and they have always been at the core of our understanding of the world. If we move to the next slide, I also want to show you some work my colleagues are doing, taking advantage of the system of satellites and satellite image in order to understand better and analyze the movement of dust that comes across North Africa towards the peninsula and towards Europe. So this is another example where the technologies are already used for good. They're already used for understanding impacts on health and impacts on industries about this dust that moves around the world from North Africa and towards the peninsula. My next example in the next slide is around a new area of work that is coming very rapidly, which is the use of computer vision and machine learning or artificial intelligence technologies in order to improve our understanding of emissions models. And here, for example, my colleagues are doing, this is a preliminary research design where they develop a methodology that can actually localize using satellite and artificial intelligence machine learning solutions to localize the origin of CH4 emissions. So those are just fabulous examples of what science is doing in this merging of using technological digital capabilities towards good. And in my next slide, what I also want to say is that this is fantastic, but we need to also interact with the other sciences, the social sciences and the humanities. So we all know that we have massive amounts of climate data, but we also need to understand, so what is all this data for, and whose data, and data for what? And how are we going to manage the understanding of this data? So the work that we have done in BSc in relation to climate services, and I'm not going to take a lot of details, is around the idea that these capabilities that we draw from the digital technologies need to be complemented by an understanding of the stakeholders and the people who are affected by climate impacts, who already understand those impacts through observation, through experience in their lives, and that we need to be able to engage very actively in the co-production of this climate information. And that is the only way in which really we can sort of land that type of information in a way that is usable and it makes sense to different communities. And this work is fundamentally important in vulnerable parts of the world, but it's also fundamentally important for industries to understand how they have to adapt, how they have to be resilient, and how to move forward in understanding climate risk. So this leads me to, and please my next slides, to sort of showing you and sharing with you some of the work that we have done in a very technology heavy company like DNB. We are a classification society and quality assurance and risk management advisory company, where we do every 5 years a technology outlook, looking into what will be the deployment of the technologies in the next years. And the last one that we did publish last year, we look into the scope of this decade, the decade that matters. And some of the work that I did was to look at this understanding of the scoping and the vision that companies do in understanding what technologies are going to be developed from the perspective of society. And what it came was very interesting, because it's really clear that we need to look at society's evolution and society's needs as an integral part of envisioning the technologies that may and should dominate 2030. And this is important because it gives another layer of argumentation for shifting investments, for shifting attention to those things that are going to be important for society. And there are multiple reasons for that. So on the one hand, is this bidirectional relationship between technology and society. It's not that technology appears outside the context of society. It is actually the result of society, and is our reflection of what that society needs and demands, what leads us to actually the license to operate. So nobody who invests in a technology ignores the societal impact of that technology, or should not. And the more we look ahead, the more scalability of a, let's say, new product one may have. Also, quite interestingly enough, we see in the digital transformation or Industry 4.0, one of the things that changes is that a lot of businesses are looking not only on the relation from business to business, but more and more so looking into the relation directly from business to consumers. But the consumer has become a fundamental piece of the game. So it is our focus on consumers, and here comes the education that our colleague was also reminding us, being fundamentally important. And the more a technology is going to have a widely shared purpose, the more likely its scalability is going to be. At the same time, we also need to be very careful with this pervasive idea that technology deepens inequalities and actually enables unsustainable lifestyles. So I think we also need to deal with this sort of misperceptions on the one hand, and big reality on the other, that the technology deepens inequalities, and we have a long history that this has exactly been the case. So more awareness of these impacts. I think it's a fundamental piece of understanding the relation on technology and society. So if we move to the next slide, one of the things that we find out is that for all those who invest and mature and deploy technologies, we are facing a trilemma, because, for example, in AI, many of the technologies, and certainly many digital technologies, are moving very fast because of effectiveness argumentation. And we heard that also. So the economic potential is huge, but that economic potential is going to be massively curtailed unless it is at the same time delivering social well-being and promoting environmental sustainability. So solving this trilemma, I think, what we need to do, and is making sure that those who have the capabilities and the means to mature technology understand that this trilemma is going to be fundamental for the scalability of technology. That's the optimistic perspective. I want to move now to talk about artificial intelligence. There is quite a lot. If we can move to the next slide, please. Artificial intelligence is a big, big thing right now. Can we move to the next slide? And the next. Thank you. Artificial intelligence is a big thing. The capabilities of calculating things through algorithms has been there for a long time, but we see in these past few years a huge interest that I think is important, because it's allowing us to make reflections about the role of technology in society. People have become very worried about the misuse of this technology. There is wonderful amount of literature showing already huge negative impacts of the use of algorithms in society and in analysis. It has been very much started and mature for the purposes of selling more rather than doing good. And what I think it's good is to see that this has led to a sprawling set of AI ethics guidelines. There is tons of them out there. And in particular in Europe, I think Europe is definitely at the forefront when we launched 2 years ago the Trustworthy AI guidelines, and more recently an emerging draft regulation, the Artificial Intelligence Act, that tries to regulate in high-risk situations the deployment of AI technologies. What is also interesting to see is that industry associations like the IEEE has already an available large amount of guidelines and standards related to the thinking of ethical issues related to AI. And even ISO, the International Standards Organization, which has a committee established a couple of years ago on artificial intelligence, does have a working group or a subcommittee that has produced already a draft on the technical and social issues related to AI, where it's all about respecting human rights, it's around the principles of non-discrimination, but there's quite a lot of material there. And I think this is building a consciousness that is important. I have two more points to make in this regard, and that is very often the ethical issues that are raised by AI are not necessarily related to the technologies. They are related to what the technology is used for and what are the motivations for using those technologies. So a lot of the unethical issues or the negative social impact is baked in the organizations that are deploying this or in the goals. Like, for example, making sure that we use an autonomous drone for the purposes of war. So that reflection is important. If we move to the next slide, I think that the field of AI ethics is also committing the mistake of, from a philosophical perspective or from an ethicist perspective, it's a category mistake. This is an illustration of the trolley problem, and I will not explain the details, but basically a lot of the AI ethics discussions are around, well, how can we code a particular ethical decision into the decision that AI is going to make? But this is not necessarily the case. And I want to show you some of the, if we move to the next slide, one of the authors today that I think explains in a very simple way. I really, really recommend Virginia Dignam's book. It's very thin, very clear, and very straightforward. Shows us that the true ethical issues related to AI are at 3 different levels, and we need the 3 of them. So it's about anticipating the consequences when we choose, or when colleagues choose, or industries choose a particular machine learning technology to solve a particular problem. So is the ethics need to be embedded in the design, but the ethics also needs to be by design. So we need to be able, through our knowledge and our coding capabilities, to anticipate and to design behavior of AI systems that are not going to promote or commit a breach of ethics. And it's also around people and organizations. It's the ethics for designers. It's about the integrity of all the actors involved, both in the research and in the implementation processes, including industries and organizations that are doing this. So the questions of AI ethics are much more complex than simply saying, oh, we want to build up a particular theory, moral theory, in the way in which we code an AI. And it takes us back to humans. I simply wanted to show you in my next slide, please, some work I did with some colleagues a year ago around the characteristics of trustworthy industrial AI systems. And I will not be able to give you all the details, but what we did was to say, if we want to assure that an artificial intelligence deployment in society is fit for purpose and causes no damage, we need to bake that in the way in which we think around the type of work that AI does. So what what is different from an artificial intelligence technology from other technologies is that they make decisions on their own, or we delegate authority to make decisions. So what we did was to make an analogy with the way in which all of us delegate authority to members of government, to leaders, to a CEO, or even to organizations to do work for us. And when we do so, we always ask for a series of things in return. We ask that this person to whom or organization to which we have delegated authority is legitimate in the case of AI. So you will look at very technical questions such as data quality, the performance, and a risk management and safety analysis. But you will also demand from this person that has the capability and the ability to perform what they are supposed to be doing. So here you have a series of questions that are also, again, very technical. But we also think that it is important to not say that humans are no longer in the system. Agents are always going to be there, including human beings and organizations and other technologies. And lastly, clearly defined purpose and transparent impact on a stakeholder. So this is just like a footprint to make sure that when we think about AI systems that are trustworthy, we baked in the social and the ethical questions together with the technical ones. But doing all this takes a lot of work. If we go to the next slide, doing the work that it takes, this is a call perhaps for research. In the next slide, please, I want to show you a project we are working right now. It's called Assuring Trustworthy, Safe, and Sustainable Transport for All. Here is where the use of AI for good is an example. So this is a zero emissions autonomous ferry as a means to ensure that we can have sustainable transport as part of a public system of transport, and is tested in the city of Trondheim in northern Norway, where we have a lot of waterways. And when we designed this project, we took to heart the idea that citizens need to be involved. It's not only that we want citizen science, but we need to truly understand what is the impact of this technology into citizens. And if we go to the next slide, and actually you can sort of, yeah, the animation is not there anymore, excellent. What we did is to do an exercise in creating an actual panel of citizens that have given us advice throughout the process by doing a information and discussion with them, by using a VR experience. We even built a mock-up a little bit, as you see in the picture, the size of the ferry. So with the VR, the citizens could actually sit, touch, and envision what it would look like. And then we also took them for a ride with the ferry that is the prototype right now, owned by the University of Science and Technology in Norway. And the last session, we actually build recommendations together. They build recommendations. And then the idea is to bring these recommendations, which were of a super high quality, to the actual, not only to the design of this ferry, but also to the design of the work that we do in assuring the technology is safe and fit for purpose for everybody. And I want to conclude, if we go to the next slide, with the work of one of the very well-known authors in the human and social dimensions of global environmental change, Karen O'Brien, that has done with this artist, Tony Bjordan. We have, for many, many years, keep saying and insisting that the big problem of integrating social and ethical issues is actually just that, it's that integration. That in a lot of the work that we do, and it's not only research, but it's also policy, humans are outside of the loop. In this beautiful redesign that Tony Bjordan did for a book that I will show you in a second, it shows what is called the Breathland Earth System graphic, where we have gathered all this knowledge about the sea, about the solar system, about the earth, about the dynamics of the physical system, the biochemical cycles, the chemistry, the vegetation, but the humans remain on that side in terms of impacts of the human activities, and in terms of the human activities to contrarrest the negative impacts. So is the integration that needs to be done? And this is a purely philosophical question. So in the next slide, I want to show you this book just launched by Karen O'Brien. It's just an exercise in thinking and in arguing a metaphor. What do we need to do in order to have the quantum leap that we need? Is that we need to really go deep into ourselves and who we are and how we relate to each other. So no technological advance will solve the failure to understand and value the social and human dimensions of technological innovation, of global environmental change, or of artificial intelligence, or the combination of all these transformations. Because it is this failure that leads to this pervasive misrepresentation of the role of human beings in both creating and solving the issues. And the most important thing here is that we don't want to give up. We need to continue imagining and hoping that those quantum leaps are possible. So I want to conclude my talk by saying, next slide, please, that we should stop thinking about the footprint that we create on the world and think about the interrelation between the footprints of the world on us and our footprint on the world. And it is in this relational understanding where the solutions will come. And in my last slide, thank you. It's just this idea that it's our relations to each other in whatever role we have at whatever moment in our life, whether it's as parents, neighbors, professionals, researchers, politicians, that we need to be looking at these relations to each other, to those near and far away, and to today and tomorrow. So it's about a deep, deep change in values and an outlook that we need if we really are to tackle the social and ethical dilemmas related to the digital transformation, to the twin digital transformation. So it's very technical, but it's also very deep. And not to forget that it's all about us, what we do and what we value. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asun. That was really a terrific talk. I sat there and listened to it all, taking notes, and really enjoyed it. I was hoping you might give us just a little bit more insight into what you were talking about with the many changes that are happening. A lot of it has been driven by specialists who have been developing the technology, and perhaps not enough with the input from communities, from societies, from those who are perhaps not so schooled yet in computer science or programming. How do we really reach these people? How do we make this an inclusive transition? And perhaps in doing that, deal with some of the uncertainties that might otherwise emerge.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a fundamental issue. So the first issue is putting the responsibilities on research and those who fund research and innovation and educators and universities. As we have moved into the 20th century and to the 21st century, we are all becoming experts on a little tiny part. We have all the incentives to be only experts on one little part, and what we need is integrated research across the sciences, and what we need is transdisciplinarity. This is a big word. But transdisciplinarity means engaging with knowledge holders outside academia, research, and innovation. And those are communities of farmers, those are communities of users, those are vulnerable communities who all have also that part of their own knowledge that is fundamental to be able to see the totality. So I'm a big, big defender of interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity in the way in which we frame research and innovation from day one. And it's not easy. It's not easy because the education system is hyper specialized, and it's not easy. Although I will say that a lot has changed slowly, certainly at the European level, with this framing of, let's say, research funding demanding the integration of the different sciences. But the same is with education, right? We need to educate people who are going to then go in government. They are going to go into industry with that mindset, the mindset of being able to be a little bit everywhere. So we need a little bit more, we need more Renaissance people with that education of the broad mind. And that should be as valuable as the technical people. But the world right now is not like this.
So we have a question that's come in from the audience. Mr. Wakeman has asked about how do we take concerns about quality of life into this transformation? How do we make sure that our focus isn't just on the technological developments, but actually really on the purpose behind this all?
Absolutely. I mean, and if we think, for example, on this trilemma that I was saying, right, we can have the need for economic and economic basis, which is important. We also need to make sure that there is environmental sustainability. But if these two pieces do not lead to social well-being, then we are defeating the purpose. So the social well-being needs to be at the core. And going back to sort of those two very nice footprint images that I presented at the end, it's all about understanding that who we are relates to others, and it's the relational nature of our own identity, both professional and individual, what leads to that. So, and concerns for the quality of life, concerns for social well-being cannot be add-on at the end. They need to be at the core. And it's, after all, and fundamentally, a change in values, a change in the way in which we conceive progress. I used to make this analogy, right? So we have had this idea that progress and development and being progressive and being advanced was equal to all sorts of accumulation of goods and consumerism, whereas that's not true. So bringing that in at the center and at the core.
Great, thanks so much. And one final question, if I may. It's really terrific hearing you. You are such an eloquent speaker. We had an earlier comment that was made in one of the other speeches about the gender dimension of this transformation. And as a woman speaking in this field, I'd be interested to hear you. Do we have enough of a gender perspective in this transition right now?
Yeah, very good question. It's part of the AI ethics discussion. The answer is no, we don't. The field of digital technologies is too male dominated, and there is actually important research that shows that there are different perceptions and even different levels of trust between men and women all over the world in relation to technologies. So I think we definitely need to make an effort, not only to have more interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, but also gender equity. But it's hard. And usually this question is translated to, oh, we need more women in STEM degrees, which is true, but I don't think that's the answer. The answer is the interdisciplinarity. So if female students or women, we have a tendency to choose professions that are different from the technology and the engineering or the computer science professions, what we need to do is to make those professions much more diverse in their conversations with the other fields. So the interdisciplinarity, in a sense, also gives you a little bit more gender equity.
Thank you. Really good insight and something for us all to think about how we do bring those different dimensions in to the discussion. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. As a member of CADS, it's really nice to see all of the work that's going on related to the double transformations, the twin challenges, and the ethical perspectives that you have brought into this discussion as well. So thanks again. And I'm now going to turn the floor over to our next speaker. We are happy to welcome Martin Harris Hess from the Directorate General for Growth, the Internal Market, Industry and Entrepreneurship of the European Commission. And here we should be hearing some perspectives on how the twin transition will be dealt with from the European Commission, what the European Commission is doing to address this issue, and how these actions can perhaps also be looked at from a local and a regional perspective. So I turn the floor over now to Mr. Martin Harris Hess.
Yeah, thank you very much and good morning. And many thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak to you at this important event. And I will highlight what the Commission can do to help shape a sustainable and ethical future through the digital transformation of our society and economy. Perhaps let's start with looking at the 6 headline ambitions of the von der Leyen Commission, so the current Commission. If you look at this, a quick glance already shows you that the green and digital transitions are top of the list. It's probably fair to say that the objective to transform the EU into a modern and resource-efficient, green and competitive economy under the Green Deal is a major and primary goal in itself. After all, climate change and environmental degradation are an existential threat to Europe and the world. So it's easy to see why the green transformation is so important. But the case for the digital transformation is a different one, in my view. Becoming digital is not an end in itself. We do not push for digitalization just to be digital. Digitalization should always be the means to an end, something we are trying to achieve to facilitate other primary goals, such as economic resilience and prosperity, but also social inclusion, democratic participation, and facilitating the green transition as well. For these reasons, many of our key policy initiatives now have digital and green ambitions at their center. And I wanted today to give you 3 examples where digital and green meet and reinforce each other in our policy making. The first one is our industrial strategy update. And under this, what I come to later a little bit is the transition pathways, as we call them. So last year in March 2020, we introduced with our industrial strategy a new focus on industrial ecosystems. So not looking at sectors, but at ecosystems, which is a broader concept. Such ecosystems encompass a very diverse number of players operating in the value chain, from the smallest startups to the largest companies, from academia to research, service providers, suppliers, but also finance and crucially policymakers in all layers of public authorities. This new approach reflects the need for a new way of thinking and working in order to lead what we call, and what's been called today as many times, the twins, or the green and digital transition of these ecosystems. Now, as chance had it, a day after the industrial strategy was published, the WHO declared the COVID-19 a pandemic, and what followed in the year and months after that, we all know. And the pandemic had a profound impact on how we conduct business, how we interact as a society, and how we look after our planet. As a result, in spring this year, the Commission published an update of the industrial strategy. It's important to know that this is not a new strategy, but builds upon the March 2020 strategy and reaffirms the priorities set out in 2020. So the 2021 update draws out lessons learned from the crisis. And one of the main lessons of the past unprecedented year is that the business case for the green and digital transition is now probably stronger than it ever was before. And this is why the update offers new measures to accelerate the green and digital transitions of our industrial ecosystems. So how do we really intend to achieve the necessary digital transformation? We came to the conclusion that a top-down approach where Brussels dictates what has to be done and sets out deliverables for private companies is unlikely to work in this context. Therefore, one tool we set out in the strategy update is that we will together with industry, social partners, but also member states and national public bodies, co-create transition pathways, as we call them, for important industrial ecosystems, starting with those ecosystems where the need to act is most urgent. That's such as the tourism ecosystem, mobility, but also energy-intensive industries. Such pathways offer a better bottom-up understanding of the scale and cost and conditions of the required actions to accompany the twin transitions. And the idea is that they will lead to concrete actions for all players involved. To start the process, we are working together with our partners to identify ecosystem-specific opportunities and the needs for digitalization, as well as potential obstacles on the way to achieve these opportunities. Following that first step, we then intend to look at which enabling tools are available for policymakers, but also for private companies, and what are the required actions to achieve the objectives we have identified and overcome the obstacles, address the need of the ecosystem. This will then all be formulated in an actionable plan, the delivery of which we are likely to monitor with the aim to revisit the progress together with member states and industry on a regular basis. Now, as each industrial ecosystem is likely to face different challenges to complete its transition towards digital leadership, the transition pathway will be tailored for each ecosystem and also likely to take into account regional and national specificities. The main work on the pathway development takes place through the Industrial Forum, which is a forum that brings together, as I said, all partners that we've identified, so social partners, member states, industry, academia, research, and we will work with our partners to help us focus where our energy and efforts are needed first. Together, we can use these pathways basically as a collaborative tool for the much needed transformation of our industrial ecosystems and develop together new green and innovative business models and change the mindsets with which we approach digitalization also for further sustainability. It's important to note in this context that one common building block of these pathways is the social dimension. Asun already mentioned it is really important to see which social impact the use of new and advanced technologies has. So our idea is that these pathways will, when assessing the digital transformation, also look at which impact it has on our society and individual citizens. This means that when we are looking at digital technologies for each ecosystems, we will be asking ourselves each time the questions, what are the social implications of pushing for further digitalization? Let me give you as my second point and a second example, an example of concrete actions that have already come out of this exercise. They will hopefully demonstrate how to link the digital and green transition. I'm talking about data policy and a number of related legislative instruments. So in our discussions with the partners in a number of ecosystems, one thing that came up again and again is the potential use of data to support industrial ecosystems and sectors to become more efficient, but also greener. This can vary from data on rainfall patterns to enable farmers to make smart decisions on water and fertilizer usage, to real-time data in production processes and manufacturing processes that help optimize energy input, to data from sensors in buildings that make it possible to monitor performance levels and help identify energy saving opportunities. But meaningful data exchange and taking smart decisions depends very much on access to quality and reliable data, supported by common interoperable data standards. Now, the problem is that often high quality data is either not available or it is not interoperable, and data holders might be unaware of the sharing and collaboration opportunities. These barriers mean that even where data might in principle be accessible, it might not be usable enough to enable organizations to derive value from it. So one idea we pursue for a number of ecosystems is therefore the creation of common data spaces to promote the pooling of data for sustainability, for example. These data spaces and the development of industry-driven data standards are very important as they allow industry players to compile, curate, share, sell and trade, as well as access quality data sets at a large scale. And to create the right framework, which will facilitate data sharing and hopefully increase the trust in data sharing opportunities, we adopted already last year a proposal for a Data Governance Act. It means the main aim of this Governance Act is to increase trust in data sharing, strengthen the mechanisms to increase data availability, and overcome technical obstacles to the reuse of data, ultimately enabling the safe sharing of sensitive data held by public bodies and encouraging data sharing by private actors. The initiative intends to bring together the vast amount of data produced by Europe's industrial base and its public bodies to provide the critical mass needed for big data analytics and artificial intelligence. Now, with more data available, the public sector can also develop better policies, leading to more transparent governance and more efficient public services. Data-driven innovation will bring benefits to companies and individuals by making our lives and work more efficient and, as I highlighted already earlier, more sustainable by using environmental data to combat climate change, reduce CO2 emissions, fight emergencies such as floods and wildfires, or by using agricultural data to develop precision farming. Both the Council and the Parliament have recently adopted favorable positions on this proposal, and negotiations between the three institutions, what we call the trilogues on the final text, are now underway. But this is not the only part of our data strategy. The legislative instrument will soon be complemented by what we call the Data Act, an instrument to foster business-to-government data sharing for the public interest and to support business-to-business data sharing. This Data Act will aim at facilitating data access and use and is about ensuring fairness in the allocation of data value among actors of the data economy. The procedure is that we recently closed the open public consultation on our proposal, and we're currently in the process of assessing the responses and finalizing the draft legislation, which we hope to adopt later this year or early next year. This leads me to my third point, and a cluster of big tech regulation, I would call it. As we are very aware that fostering digitalization does not mean to let it run its course unchecked. There are a number of challenges inherent in the increasing use of digital applications. And we in the Commission have adopted a whole range of proposals over the last 2 years, suggesting how to ensure that the use of such new and advanced technologies happens responsibly, ethically, and in the interest of citizens. You've probably heard of the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, a package which together aims at creating a safer digital space where the fundamental rights of our users are protected and to establish a level playing field for businesses. The Digital Services Act offers citizens less exposure to illegal and harmful content online, and our society at large a greater democratic control and oversight over big platforms, as well as better protection from disinformation. The Digital Markets Act sets out a number of do's and don'ts for the very largest platforms, which have established themselves as gatekeepers for our digital interaction online and yield considerable market power when it comes to access the online world. But I would like to focus here now as under this third example umbrella, before coming to a close, on a proposal we adopted this spring, the Artificial Intelligence Act, as we call it, which is one leg of the EU's AI strategy. So the EU's approach to artificial intelligence centers on excellence and trust, aiming to boost research and industrial capacity, whilst ensuring at the same time that the protection of our fundamental rights. The first leg, the excellence part, is supported by the revised coordinated plan on AI, which outlines a vision to accelerate, act, align priorities of national and EU AI strategies. But it's not in our interest solely to push for Europe becoming a world leader in AI. Building trustworthy AI is equally important and will create a safe and innovation-friendly environment for users, developers, and deployers. And to support this trust angle and limit any negative social and ethical impact of the use of artificial intelligence systems, the AI Act aims to address the risks generated by specific uses of AI through a set of risk-based, proportionate, and flexible rules. Now, the rules we are proposing, or the entire proposal, is based on our collaboration with the high-level expert working group on ethical AI, which was established, I think it's now 3 years ago, and provided very valuable input to our work and proposal that have been taken on board when we drafted this AI Act. The framework we now propose gives AI developers, deployers, and users the clarity they need by intervening only in those cases that have safety or fundamental rights implications, and which are not already covered by existing national and EU legislations. I think it's worth noting that AI, the use of AI systems, of course, doesn't operate in a legal vacuum. There are already rules on fundamental rights and so on that are applicable also when AI is used. But we identified that there are certain technical challenges when you use automated decision-making processes that might make it difficult, at least, to enforce existing rules. And here's where the AI Act intends to plug the gap and make sure that that no harm comes from the use of AI applications. The legal framework proposes a clear and easy to understand approach based on 4 levels of risk. So when the AI system creates an unacceptable risks and the AI system is considered a clear threat to the safety, livelihoods, and rights of people, it will be banned. This ranges from social scoring by governments to toys using voice assistants that encourages dangerous behavior. The next category, the high risk category, so where an AI system is identified as high risk, it will be subject to a strict set of obligations before it can be put on the market. This includes adequate risk assessment and mitigation systems in place, requirements concerning the quality of the data sets feeding the system to minimize from the outset any discriminatory outcomes, the logging of activity to ensure traceability and the traceability of results and appropriate human oversight. They are all measures to minimize the risk. Then the third category is those with limited risk. For these systems, there are specific transparency obligations that we want to see apply. As an example, when we use AI systems such as, for example, chatbots, users should be aware that they are interacting with a machine so that they can take informed decisions to continue or step back if they so wish. But the large number of AI applications probably fall in the last category, which is the minimal risk one. And they are likely to pose no or only a minimal risk on the safety or the fundamental rights of citizens. I'm talking about spam filters or AI-enabled video games, something like this. For those, there are no specific restrictions that apply. It is worth noting here that, of course, as I said earlier, existing other rules are in place, which are not AI specific, but they continue to apply. Now, this proposal is now discussed in Council and Parliament, and we hope that an agreement with the co-legislators can be reached in the second half of 2022. We have already seen that the publication of the proposal alone put Europe in a leading role when it comes to AI regulation, and many other countries and regions in the world have a close eye on what we're doing. I've read, for example, that just this morning in my inbox that Brazil has now adopted an AI law that is very similar to what we are proposing. And so similar to what we have on data protection, where the GDPR was an example that is now copied across the world, we have the chance to set also global gold standard in the AI arena. In particular, as part of the Transatlantic Trade and Tech Council, the TTC, we are in close talks with the US to ensure that we have a similar approach to ethical AI on both sides of the Atlantic. And with this upbeat outlook, I would like to end my talk for today and hand over the floor back for any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hess. Your presentation just now really gave us a good look at what the European Commission is doing in this area, but also stressing the importance of thinking about where a governance perspective is necessary here and what kinds of gaps we have despite existing laws dealing with human rights protections and other kinds of ethical protections, that new technological developments open new questions and new areas that we need to look at. So exciting to hear that these transitions are happening in the governance field as well. But I'd like to see if we can bring in a question here coming from our chair, Arnau Quarau, to ask you about the regional dimensions here and how do we bring in and make sure we understand the different governance perspectives that we have across Europe in formulating these new governance rules.
Yeah, thank you. I think the regional dimension is a very important dimension when it comes to kind of developing the technologies, but also disseminating, but also, as you say, on the governance level. Now, one of the advantages of the transition pathways I've mentioned is that they will be a very concrete tool to identify challenges, not only across the ecosystems, but also of the different players. So when there are regional specificities, so that's the word, these can be picked up in a very concrete kind of action point in these pathways. We in Brussels often kind of a little bit, how do I put it, in a difficult position, because our intention is the creation of a single market. So we try and kind of set rules that apply across 27 member states and I don't know how many regions, which is tricky then from Brussels' point of view to kind of take into account regional specific requirements. But the beauty of these transition pathways is that there we can kind of go into more granular detail and pick out actions that are very specific to a certain region. The other thing it's not so much on the governance side, but the other thing I always promote when I can speak about it is the European digital innovation hubs that are specifically designed to work in a specific region or even cross-border regions. We have a couple of hubs where kind of France-German border, for example, or in Italy, in northern Italy, which work with the local community, both on the private actors, but also the public sector, to develop very specific, locally designed solutions.
And in doing this, where do you see in the next 2-3 years the biggest challenges for the European Commission? What are the things that you are most eager to solve?
I think the potential of using data, I think it was my second point today, is a massive opportunity, but also a really big challenge for us. Now, I think it's probably fair to say that on the business to consumer level, so the platforms, the big kind of social network platforms, Europe, might be too harsh to say we lost the battle, but other companies from other regions have us very far ahead. But on the industrial side and also the business to government side, I think Europe has a strength in the creation of that data, and if we create the right sharing environment, we can be world leaders, in my view, to come up with innovative, not just business solutions, but also public solutions, so public policy and government solutions that help use this data in the interest of our citizens.
Thank you. In fact, what you started off with, the comment that digitalization is there as a tool to get to some place. And I think what we really do need to understand here is the power of digitalization to enhance access to information, collection of information, sharing of information, and application of new ideas and concepts. And hopefully is focused on the concerns of this particular conference, taking up the sustainable development goals, the sustainability challenges as some of those purposes behind this digital transformation. But thanks again for joining us and pointing out to us also how very important thinking about governance and regulatory perspectives are. So thanks to you in Brussels for joining us here in Barcelona, and we wish you a happy rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
And with this, I would like to now take a few minutes to wrap up here. We are at the end of our day one of this conference dealing with digitalization and the ethical and social environmental dimensions of sustainability. I think we have had a really useful first day that has helped us to think about what digitalization is, who's involved, what some of the missing elements in the digitalization transformation to date are, how we make digitalization more integrative across the development of these technologies and their application with the societal and environmental challenges that we are concerned about as the European Environment and Sustainable Development Advisory Councils. We have big challenges ahead of us as a global community and as a European community. And today we have heard about some of the ways that digitalization can help us to tackle some of these challenges, as well as some of the new challenges that arise as a result of the development of new powers that come with new technologies. The concerns about, are we losing democratic voice? Are we seeing the use of digitalization in ways that don't fit into the value systems of a democratic system? And how do we protect against that? How do we make sure that the societal needs and the perspectives of multiple actors and communities are brought into the design of digital technologies and applications? I think these are some of the very important things we heard about today, as well as thinking about how the European Commission has a role to play in developing standards and frameworks that will help businesses and other actors, institutions, and governments to work more effectively and feel that they're doing that in a way that is safe and also true to the values that we have here in Europe, values that deal with equality and future generations, concerns about democracy, and of course the big challenges of making sure that we develop in such a way that the next generations also have an opportunity to enjoy a high quality of life and to protect environment and make this an inclusive project for all. So thank you all for joining us today in this virtual annual conference of the EEAC. It's a pleasure to have had such great speakers on day one, and we look forward to seeing you back here at 9:30 in the morning Central European Time for part 2 and day 2 of this Digital Transformation and Sustainable Development Conference. Thank you.